Yihiyu l'ratzonim refi v'gion libi lefanecha, Adonai tzori v'goali. May the words of my mouth and thoughts of my heart be acceptable before you, O God, my rock and my redeemer. Shalom all and welcome to our KosherTorah School. I'm of course your host Ariel Bar Tzadok. You find me in our school online at www.koshertorah.com. The following audio lesson is the copyrighted intellectual property of yours truly, me, Ariel Bar Tzadok. Copyright 2017, all rights reserved. You may not be recording this lesson, any part of this lesson, at this or at any other time. No part of it may be recorded, forwarded to any other party, shared, reproduced, distributed, or transmitted in any form by any means, including email, copying, recording, or other electronic or mechanical methods. Violators of this copyright will be barred from all further studies in our KosherTorah School, and possibly prosecuted under any applicable laws. So please, respect this copyright. And please, this is a lesson about religion, so act properly religious. And I thank you. We are presently learning the Talmud. We are learning the Perek Berakhot, the fourth chapter therein, called Tefilat HaShahar, morning prayer. And this is the second lesson, as I said, in that in this course. And we introduced the topic and concept of what is Talmud, what is Mishnah, what is Gemara, and the like. And we read the opening Mishnah, and it introduced to us four concepts, ideas, beliefs, statements about the times of prayer. We discussed the time of the morning prayer, the time of the afternoon prayer, the time of the evening prayer, and the time of the Musaf prayers, which again we call those are the additional prayers. Now, the Gemara is going to discuss each and every one of these in order. So, just to take the Mishnah again, we began with the topic, the statement, Tefilat HaShahar ad Hatzot. Morning prayers can be recited until noon. And we also included the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, who states only until the fourth hour of the day. We described seasonal hours and defined the time of prayers are not set by what the time is on the clock, but rather what is nature's time. And we defined nature's time as from sunup to sundown. And we digressed to question whether sunup is when the ball of the sun rises on the horizon, or earlier when the rays of the sun rise on the horizon. When the rays of the sun rise on the horizon, we call that Amud HaShahar, or the rising of the morning. And when the ball of the sun rises, we call that Henetz HaChama, the raising of the sun. Those are two different times, separated often by an entire hour seasonally. And again, we described that as seasonal hour. It's 1/12 of the day. And again, it all depends on when you decide to start the day, whether it's again from Amud HaShahar or from Henetz HaChama. So, all of these ideas and beliefs revolve around a concept that there is a proper time to pray. And you got to get this now, that there is actually a proper prayer to be recited. Now again, remember, we are discussing this within the context of the observance of Judaism and Torah and Rabbinic law. These laws or obligations are only incumbent upon those Torah observant Jews. And of course, those who are not Torah observant, according to the rabbis, are still obligated. But our Noahide students who are not Jewish are not obligated by these prayers and the like. Does that mean that they cannot recite them? No, recite whatever you want. there are certain, what I consider to be racist opinions, which try to deter non-Jews from observing certain Jewish rituals, saying, oh, it is not for your soul doesn't connect, and yada yada. Well, psychologically speaking, there may be a distance from what we can call a Jewish archetype to a non-Jewish individual who hasn't been raised in a Jewish household. That psychologically might be true, but that's really irrelevant. Many people come to Jewish traditions and practice, and it makes them feel closer to God to do this or that thing. Well, you know, if it means something to you, fine. I don't see why anybody would deter you. As long, pray God, that your heart is in the right place, that you can do as you so choose. So in that respect, you'll have many Noahides today who will observe the Sabbath or keep kosher or recite prayers. Now, I do not necessarily discourage that, whereas at the same time, I emphasize to those who choose to voluntarily, by choice and desire, perform some of these rituals, that they should never be mistaken to think that these things are A, obligatory, B, make you better than anyone else, God forbid, or C, make you closer to God. None of the above are true. Well, if they don't make me closer to God, why do I do it? I guess because it makes you feel good, makes you feel better. It gives something to you, it speaks to you in a way that's valuable. And if that is your experience, then fine, go for it. But as a Noahide, never think that Jewish rituals somehow have magic to them that can draw you closer to God. That is just not true. So therefore, as a Noahide, if you're eating a cheeseburger, don't feel guilty about it because your Jewish brethren do not eat cheeseburgers. Big deal. Consider it, if you will, like the differences between men and women, or anything of the kind. Do men really feel upset or jealous or left out because they do not wear brasiers like women do? Do men feel upset and left out that they don't have monthly periods like women do? No, God forbid. Essentially, God created Jews, non-Jews. We're all part of the same human race, just like men and women. We each have different functions, different roles, but we work together. And no one should seek to be an other. When we're learning Gemara here and teaching it publicly as we are, and all people are obviously welcome to come, we are here teaching Torah practices to those who are observant. And we are explaining ways and methods of thought, thinking processes, which are excellent and valuable for everyone. We don't make any distinctions here, male, female, or anything of the kind. Everybody's all welcome to come and study our Torah. So therefore, as we discussed in our previous lesson, we introduced that which we call the Amidah, the standing prayer, the Shemona Esrei, the 18 blessings, which according to tradition was established by Ezra, biblical Ezra, and has been prayed as the foundational prayer in Judaism, even in the days of the temple. Now, that is the point of view of the religion. There might be some scholars who would argue and debate that and say that it was developed at a later time and whatever. Because why is it a whatever? Simply because, as we learn, the Talmud is not the Bible. The Talmud is not a final word. The Talmud, like we spoke in our last class, is an encyclopedia, a compendium of ideas, knowledge, and beliefs. It is not meant to be a definitive code of law. It is meant to be an explanation of things. And that is what Gemara is. So even when Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, who is the author of our Mishnah, he is himself an authoritative individual. And yet there were other authorities before him, other practices and traditions other than his, some of which were rather dominant and important. And Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, to his credit, often references them in his Mishnah. But as we also learn, there were other groups of equally authoritative, if you will, equally adequate ancient laws that were not included by Rabbi Yehuda in his Mishnah. And these were called Baraitot. And these other Mishnayot, they were often from collections. One of the most famous, of course, is called the Tosefta. And we're about to introduce something from there momentarily. So, getting back to our topic. We know that we have a morning prayer. Why do we have a morning prayer? Well, we'll discuss that as we proceed. What prayers should be reciting? Somebody could say, can I just pray from my heart? And I could say, but of course you can. Even in the strict liturgy of the Shemona Esrei, in each and every one of the 18 blessings, people can add their own words. So for example, when you have the blessing for healing, you can add and say, please Hashem also remember my sick friend, family member, etc. When we're praying for things like wisdom or knowledge, you could say, and Hashem help me in my tests in school. Yes, it is okay to make these additions. In our Sephardi tradition, you will often see in the Sephardic prayer book, the Siddur, many additional small prayers put into the different sections of the Amidah, of Kabbalistic origins, often using holy names and the like, calling for this or that thing. And that's totally fine. So, prayer is both a combination of heart and liturgy. The authorities, the sages, put together a liturgy so as to give the nation a common core of values, so that regardless of where people are, from the furthest reaches in the Western world to the furthest reaches of the Eastern world, we would all be focused on the same. And it was this building of a commonality that enabled Judaism to survive for the thousands of years that it did, without a land, without a country, without a nation. So now, going back to our discussion of prayer. We have the Amidah, which is considered the prayer. And Rabbi Yehuda, our author, Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, says, the right time to pray it, we're going to learn that. Notice he says you can pray it until noon. Okay, end time, noon. What's the beginning time? When do I start it? Now that's a question. And in that respect, we're going to turn now to our Gemara. So, Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi says, morning prayers until noon. And the Gemara opens up with a simple word, urminhu. And in contrast, or in contradiction, or in challenge. Now, you can go and look, and remember, I'm using the Art Scroll edition of the Talmud, and I highly encourage you to get a copy of it. You will see that they have very copious notes at the bottom of the page which add a tremendous amount of information and background, which I consider an excellent compliment. And I highly encourage its usage. Whereas you can look at the older version of the Talmud, which was translated by Sonsino, without anything, and all it does is make a simple statement. This was contrasted with the following. And it doesn't explain or digress to help us understand the nature and the flow of the discussion. Now remember, we are not sitting here with a audio version of anything. This was all an edited, redacted text, which, if anything, is almost in shorthand. So, the question is, all right, mitzvata im hanetzachama. By contrast, we just said the end time. So by contrast now, we're going to mention the beginning time. And we say mitzvata, it's mitzvah, or it's the commandment, the best time to do it, is with the rising of the sun. Henetz hachama. So Rabbi Yehuda said in the Mishnah, you can only pray until noon. Along comes a baraita, another Mishnah not included, which states, and by contrast, it's time that we begin is right at the crack of dawn, sunrise. Okay? And, well, why? Why would we want to pray so early? And he states here, Kedei sheyismoch geula letefila v'nimtza mitpalel bayom. Now, he says the reason why you would recite the Amidah at the crack of dawn is so you will therefore be connecting two parts of the prayer service together, and we will find that you're beginning the Amidah prayer right at the crack of dawn. And you go, well, wait a second, am I missing something? Where did all this crack of dawn come from? And what is this geula? And what are we talking about? Well, for those who are familiar with the traditional Torah services, you'll be familiar with these concepts. But for those who are not, we have to digress to discuss. The prayer service, as it exists today, is pretty much divided into four different sections. Recitation of the sacrificial offerings. Section 2, recitation of psalms. Section 3, recitation of proclamations of faith. And then section 4, the Amidah, the prayer. Well, the section of the proclamation of faith includes the very famous quotations from Deuteronomy chapter 6, which is the Shema Yisrael, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one prayer. And our sages added to the biblical scripture opening words of praise of God, called Berakhot, and followed it with praises of God, also a bracha. And the blessing after the Shema Yisrael concludes with the words, Blessed are you, Hashem, Redeemer of Israel. Baruch atah Hashem Ga'al Yisrael. That is called the Geula, the redemption prayer. And timing is considered essential. And that the timing is that you should be reciting these words, Baruch atah Hashem Ga'al Yisrael, right with the rising of the sun. So as the sun hits the horizon, bam! You go right into the recitation of the Amidah. So therefore, by analogy, or not really by analogy, but by inferral, we recognize that the proper time for reciting the Shema Yisrael in the morning is right before sunrise. Because the blessings right thereafter only take, 2-3 minutes. And if you want to finish those 2-3 minutes right with the rising of the sun, then bam! Amidah time. Now, to give you a little flavor of these notes that the Art Scroll brings down, I want to read to you a note that they write with regards to this baraita, where we said the mitzvata ima netzachama. All right, it's mitzvah, it's proper time of, what is it? It is referencing the Shema Yisrael prayer. All right, so that you can recite it with the rising of the sun, so that again it connects the Geulah, the conclusion of that, to the Amidah, and therefore you pray right with the crack of dawn. It says here by praying by day. So, note 7 in the art scroll reads like this. I'm going to read to you in full because again it gives you a background and understanding of that which we're talking about. And I quote, that this baraita, they of course call it in the Ashkenazi language baraisa, is an excerpt from the Tosefta, that collection of the baraitot, like I mentioned to you. In an earlier section, not cited in the Gemara, the Tosefta states that the earliest time for reciting the Shema is when there is sufficient light to recognize an acquaintance at a distance of 4 amot, which is a measure of about 6 feet today. Now remember, in these days, what we're talking about, Talmudic times, people didn't have electric lights. It's not like you woke up out of bed and flipped on the light switch. When you woke up out of bed, you were in the dark. Unless, of course, you had an oil lamp or a candle that burned all night. Some did, some didn't. So, under the circumstances, if it's dark, and let's say you like your oil lamp in your house, you get dressed and you're going to go off to synagogue in the morning. Well, what's it like out on the street? Remember, you didn't have a car, you didn't have a bus, the synagogue was all local. There were no street lights, there were no lamps. When you walked out at night, it was dark. As such, when would we say is this right time for the Shema? So by a natural definition of time, without any need for a clock, a natural definition of time, which would be equally applicable in the most far-flung western communities of Spain, or the most eastern far-flung communities in India, China. We say that from the time that there is sufficient light to recognize somebody at a distance of 6 feet. And again, when it's pitch black out, that's something. So again, the Tosefta then states, in a section cited here, that the preferred method is nevertheless to delay the Shema's recital until shortly before sunrise, so that one utters the words Baruch Atah Hashem Gal Yisrael, which concludes the blessing of redemption following the Shema, just before sunrise, and begins the Shemona Esrei exactly at sunrise. In this way, one accomplishes 2 things. He juxtaposes the blessing of the redemption with the Shemona Esrei, which the Gemara on page 9b teaches an extremely meritorious achievement. And he recites the Shemona Esrei at sunrise, which is mentioned, he says in a previous note, is preferable to reciting it before sunrise. But if, however, one were to recite the Shema at its earliest time, which is substantially before sunrise, one would be forced either to recite the Shemona Esrei at that point as well, in order to join the blessing of redemption to the Shemona Esrei, which is not preferable to do it early, or to delay beginning the Shemona Esrei until sunrise, thereby creating an undesirable gap between the blessing of the redemption and the Shemona Esrei. And he quotes a whole bunch of sources. So this is the concept, this is the idea that we're talking about. When is the right time to pray? Well, the Baraita brings down the beginning times. Now, where do we have this concept that I'm supposed to be up at the crack of dawn to be reciting my ritual prayers and reciting the Shema right before sunrise with the Amidah right at the crack of dawn? Where do I learn this from? Who says? The Gemara continues, all right? And it goes, Kitanya hahi Watikin. Wait a second. And just for a note, you're going to find that the majority of the language of the Gemara is Aramaic, not Hebrew. As such, when Jewish students learn Talmud, and they study Talmud every day, they eventually absorb the Aramaic language. And for those people who are religious in vernacular conversation, you'll always find the combination of Hebrew, and if they're Ashkenazi, Yiddish, with Aramaic words all the time. So for example, a statement in the Gemara which translates as yes, you're right, is in hachinami. In hachinami. So, in yeshiva talk, if you will, if and when you're dialoguing back and forth, and you want to say, yeah, I know, you're right, you'd say, Ken, in hachinami. There you are, throwing Aramaic into the modern twist. But anyway, with regards to this teaching of the earliest time for reciting the Shema, remember, the redactor and editor of our Gemara is now, if you will, almost creating a dialogue and saying, wait a second, that teaching which we just quoted about the earlier time they recited, that Tanya means a teaching, that is for, or is referred to the Watikin. The Watikin, and yeah, I'm pronouncing it in the Sephardi tradition. The Ashkenazim would say Vatikin. Alright? Watikin. Vatikin. Who are these ancient ones? Art Scroll translates it as the devoted ones. How does the Sansino, what does the Sansino say here? Let me see. Oh, it doesn't even translate it. They just put it in the Watikin. And they even put it in the correct, proper Hebrew version. Alright. The Watikin are an interesting group. I'll digress to discuss them in a minute. Well, how do we know that this reference of this tradition of reciting the Shema and the Amidah at the crack of dawn was a teaching that these Watikin guys instituted? How do we know? Well, we have an oral tradition. Oh, really? Who said? Oh, you really want to know who said? Well, I'll tell you who said. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan said. And you want to know exactly what he said? Let me tell you. He said, Watikin hayu gomrim ota im henetz hachama. Rabbi Yochanan said that these ancient Watikin, they're the ones who would recite the Shema at its earliest time. Okay? Now, that's a dramatic pause I'm giving you here. Yeah, that's right. Because you're going to see in a minute that the Gemara is going to go off in a different direction now. So, essentially, what is the Gemara responding? The Gemara is saying, yeah, there is a teaching that states the right time of the prayers are with the crack of dawn. But Rabbi Yochanan also taught us that that tradition is what the Watikin did. And the ways, or the Halakha, or the Torah of the Watikin, is not for everybody. It's not obligatory. Yeah, it's a tradition. Yeah, it's an observance. Yeah, you could do it like that. But not everybody is obligated to do it like that. Now, what's the difference? For those of you who are Torah observant, think about what it would mean that every single morning you have to be up at least an hour before dawn. Get up, get dressed, get to synagogue, start your prayers so that at the rise at the crack of dawn, you're already through the prayers. If you are living in the Northern Hemisphere, for example, places like New York or other, where in which your sunrise in the spring, summer can be as early as 5:30 a.m. Well, you're starting your prayers at, say, 4:45, 5 o'clock, which means you got to be at synagogue at the latest, like 4:45, which means you're up probably at least 4 a.m. How many of us are getting up at 4 a.m. in the morning to be ready to be able to recite the Amidah? Remember, you need time to get dressed, get to synagogue, put on the talit, the tefillin, recite all the sacrificial prayers, all the psalms, all the others, etc. So it's a big deal. And if we were to obligate you, saying that is the only time that it can be done, that would be a problem. How many people do you think would really get up for that? There is a general principle of Torah law that the sages are not allowed, by their own decree, to make any kind of imposition or law upon the community that the community can't live up to. Don't make impossibly high goals. And to think that everybody's going to rise the crack of dawn to pray, and at no other time, that's not reasonable. Can somebody do it if they so choose? Sure. There's nothing wrong with praying in what's called, to this day, a Watikin minyan, or as the Ashkenazim would say, a Watikin minyan. Almost every city that I know has one. Well, Jerusalem, we certainly had one. New York, certainly have one. Chicago, Los Angeles, all the places I've lived, we've always had one. So, it had its members. Then everybody else would go and pray whenever they would. They'd pray an hour after sunrise, 2 hours after sunrise, as long as they got the prayer done in its time. And when that time is, well, we'll see. But let's digress a wee bit to discuss who are these ancient ones, these Watikin, super pious ones. Well, it might help us to have a little bit of a further understanding if we digress to discuss the nature of prayer itself. Later in the Gemara, it states that these original Watikin, they would meditate for an hour prior to prayer, and then pray for an hour, and then meditate for an hour after prayer. So their entire morning service took 3 hours. They did that in the afternoon and also supposedly in the evening. There are many traditions which are ascribed to these Watikin, which from a classical Jewish point of view would not necessarily stand out as unusual. But in modern times, in light of modern discoveries and modern understandings and insight of the historical period of the Second Temple, the identity of these Watikin becomes clearer and clearer. And we recognize them not by their Hebrew or Aramaic name, but by a more popular name ascribed to them, today called the Essenes. So, while people like Josephus are going to say, well, the Essenes and the Pharisees, they were as different as the day and the night, two different groups, that's totally not true. And you have Jewish scholars of the Dead Sea Scrolls, like Professor Lawrence Schiffman, who will show you the Halachot of the Sarach HaYahad and other books of the scroll community, and their Halachot. And we will see curious things in their halachic discussions, which we recognize from Talmudic halachic discussions. We will see many of their positions and opinions were certainly not embraced by our sages, but at least it helps us to recognize them historically. So this group of ancient pious ones, they did things very meditatively. They were very spiritual. But whether we're talking about the ancient Essenes or any group like them, remember the Essenes as a political group were a bunch of violent extremists. They were, for lack of better words, narcissist. They were clearly sexist, racist, and again violent. They were a Jewish ISIS of their day. And in my opinion, good riddance to them, because they're the ones who gave rise to the philosophies that gave rise to the Yeshu movement and the Berioni movement, which provoked the war with Rome, which led to the destruction of the temple and the nation. So I have no sympathy for these types and their extremisms. Yet, out of their extremist elements, there were, needless to say, Torah teachings of meditative practice, which were also practiced in what we call the Pharisaic or Rabbinic camps, the likes of which we see in Tractate Hagigah, the likes of which we see in the Ascents of Rabbi Ishmael, the likes of which is the prophetic Kabbalah to this day. So the ancient teachings of the Essenes, of the spiritual side, their herbological teachings, their angelic teachings, and that which was known and understood by the Rabbinic community was all one and the same. The only real division between the two was politics. So, somebody's making a mention of davening at midnight. You don't find that mentioned here. That is Zoharic in tradition, 1,000 years after the time of the Mishnah. not of concern for us at this time. So therefore, in concluding our understanding of the original time of prayer, we stated that there is this earliest tradition, and that these Watikin guys, they did it like that. And the implication is, just because they did it, don't mean that we got to do it. In inference, without having to say it, the Gemara, by stating the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan here, is saying to us, yeah, that's fine, but it's not obligatory. There are many, many laws, many traditions, many ideas and concepts that float around today in the name of Jewish law and Judaism. And many people will go onto the internet and go to this or that Jewish site, and they'll read about this or that practice, and they'll think, wow, that sounds cool, that sounds spiritual, that sounds good, I think I'm going to do it. It makes me feel closer to God. Well, again, if it plays that psychological role, good for you. But no one should ever delude themselves into thinking that which is not obligatory is obligatory. That is inappropriate. And part of our Talmudic learning is to recognize these things. Not to tell you what to do, but that you can recognize and know and understand what you don't need to do, as opposed to what you might want to do. So yes, there's a Kabbalistic tradition to get up and pray the midnight service. You want to get up at midnight and pray? Go for it. No one's going to stop you. But don't think yourself superior because you do. Don't go around thinking yourself more spiritual because you do. And don't feel guilty if you start doing it and you can't keep it up. You see the nature and flow of the Gemara? The Gemara references a Mishnah. The Mishnah, of course, says, with regards to our topic, the end times of prayer is like this, to which the Gemara says, but by contrast, the beginning time is like that. Oh, by the way, you know that, which we're talking about, this beginning time, that's not for everybody. It's only for those who wish to observe like that. So that is how the Gemara concludes it. Now, to this very day, the correct or best proper time to recite the Shema is right before dawn, and to recite the Amidah with the crack of dawn. The way of the Watikin, Vasikin. That's how it's written in the Shulchan Aruch. Yeah, that's the good way to do it, but not the obligatory way to do it. And for the most people in Jewish practice to this day, most people do not go to a Vasikin minyan, a Watikin minyan, nor do they have to. If you want to, go right ahead. Years and years and years ago, when I lived in Beersheba, before I even moved to Jerusalem, before Israel even had daylight savings time, sunrise was 4:30 a.m. I thought I was going to an early minyan when I went to a 5:30 a.m. minyan. But I lived in a working neighborhood in Beersheba, all right, in Dalat Safon. And at 5:30 a.m., the buses are running, the stores, the kiosks, all right, they're starting to open. People are all hustling, bustling around the street. I want to get up at the crack of dawn. I want to get up with the rising, early in the morning. By 5:30, everybody else is up. I had to start to go and get up at 3:30 in the morning so I could be at the synagogue at 4:45, so I could recite the prayers by 4:30 a.m. Now that is an early minyan. And okay, talking about getting up early. So that's the tradition. But now the Gemara is going to go back to discuss the concepts introduced in the Mishnah itself. What's the end time for reciting the prayers? Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi said until noontime. Rabbi Yehuda, different Rabbi Yehuda, he says until the 4th hour. So now, the Gemara is going to go back and discuss that. V'kulei alma, Aramaic, ad chatzot, v'tulo. The Gemara now asks a question. All right, kulei alma means kol olam, which actually means everybody. So you're telling me everybody is of the opinion that you can only pray until noontime and no later? Really? That's the law? That's the opinion? That's the final word? And now we're going to quote. Wait a second. Remember we talk about whenever you want to bring up an opinion, you better say whose opinion it is? So the Gemara continues and states, V'hamar Rav Mari Bere de Rav Huna Bere de Rabbi Yirmiyah Bar Abba Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Wait a second. There's this guy Rav Mari. He's the son of Rav Huna, who is the son of Rabbi Yirmiyahu Bar Abba, who said, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, again, quoting your sources, proving your sources. And this time, most learning was oral. Remember, even here, when we're going to mention this Rav Mari, the son of Rav Huna, Rav Mari, the son of Rav Huna, most likely never read the Babylonian Talmud in his life. Gee, why not? Well, it wasn't written then. Didn't come around till a century later or so. So therefore, when dear old Rav Mari, just like Rabbi Yirmiyah Bar Abba or Rabbi Yochanan, when they went and learned, they sat and learned these things orally. And that's why we have an oral tradition and an oral Torah. So therefore, if you want to make a claim, if you want to quote an old rule, a Baraita, or certainly a Mishnah, well, you better be able to say where you heard it from. You better be able to quote its source. So if I, for example, wanted to say, well, there's an old teaching that says you can't study Torah on Thursdays. Oh, really? Who the heck said that? Oh yeah, well, shut up. If you're umming it. Who said it? Where did that come from? What's the source? Now, why is this important? Especially today. Again, in our modern connected world, where in which somebody wants to learn about something, they can go on the internet and literally have the world at their fingertips. So you can go on to your favorite search engine, Google or whatever, and type in Jewish law. What is Jewish law about this or that? And type in whatever your topic of choice is. I'll betcha you will get a whole bunch of different answers. Kind of like or maybe similar, but divergent. And you will find from all different sources. Let me give you an example, not with regards to law, but with regards to ideas and philosophy. Long, long time ago, I was once doing an interview with Tamar Yona on Israel National News Radio. And the topic was the afterlife. And I made a mention to her that most of the rabbis today believe in reincarnation. This is referenced in the Zohar, the Kitvei Ha'ari, and many of the great rabbis, Kabbalists and otherwise, embrace the topic. Well, we had this one other person who called the end. And I said, lies, lies, lies. Torah does not teach that. There's no such thing. Lies, lies, lies. Matter of fact, if you Google my name, Ariel Bar Tzadok, amongst the many things, you'll find a reference to this topic. Well, I happen to have checked out this guy who called him out, who calls himself a rabbi, says he has authentic Torah and the like. And I was shocked and amazed at just how glaringly dishonest this individual was, which made me question whether or not he truly was a Torah-observant Orthodox Jew, like he said, simply because he lied. He very well knows that the teachings of the Zohar, and that the teachings of the Zohar were adopted by Rabbi Yosef Karo, the author of the Shulchan Aruch, and all the later great sages. What he could have said or should have said is, there are those who do not accept reincarnation and are of a different opinion. Now, if he said that, I could agree and said, yes, that is true. That is a minority opinion today, to which he would have had to have agreed if he was telling the truth. But he chose not to tell the truth. He chose to hide the truth. And he did it in the public airways. And needless to say, Tamar Yona is not a sage. She's not a scholar. She, took this guy at face value, and it was very confusing for her. And needless to say, many others jumped on the bandwagon. Many other rabbis and others got involved and really put this guy in his rightful place for being deceptive. Now, I give you this example. And it's still out there on the internet. You go Google my name and scroll down through the things, and you'll see it. My point is that this could confuse people. This person accused me of being deceptive, lying. The reincarnation is a belief in Judaism. That's a lie? Really? Go into any Jewish bookstore today. Go on any of the online bookstores. You'll see a dozen books on Jewish reincarnation. To call that a lie is a deception. It's just wrong. And this is just one example of many of people who can come across and claim that Judaism teaches this or that. You have many people in the Christian community who today are called Messianic Jews, who embrace some form and embrace of Judaism. Whatever. They will make claims in the name of Judaism, their Judaism. And others in the same way. You will have all kinds of maybe reform or conservative people making claims in the name of Judaism. And don't think that there are not Jewish cults. There certainly are. They'll make claims in the name of Judaism. So therefore, whenever you hear about, well, the Zohar says this, the Talmud says that, Rabbi so-and-so said this, check it out. One of the more popular deceptions that has been around on the internet in previous years was something that was attributed to Rabbi Kadori, the famous Kabbalist. It is alleged and claimed that prior to his passage, he said that the name of the Messiah would be Yeshua. And the Christians jumped on the bandwagon and says, oh, he knew Jesus! The great Kabbalist in Jerusalem knew Jesus! And they went on and on and on with this. I think even one evangelist even wrote a book about it. Well, in all due respect, in Rav Kadori's last weeks and months on the earth, I was not at his bedside. So I don't know what he said or didn't say. So therefore, I had to check it out. Check the sources. So therefore, I went and contacted members of his family. His son, who was at his dad's bedside. And it was told to me, Rav Kadori had a breathing tube down his throat. He wasn't saying anything to anybody about anything. And all of that story is comprehensively and completely, not a misunderstanding, completely false. I guess today what we call fake news. Well, Rav Kadori said, no, he didn't. Check it out. Well, the Gemara says, no, it doesn't. Check it out. The Zohar, the Kabbalah says, no, it doesn't. Check it out. How do I do that? Look for the source. And any and every teaching that you receive from any source, including our KosherTorah School, check the source. That is why my personal tradition is to teach texts. You don't see me teaching topics. Very rarely do I teach topic. I teach text so that you can see with your own eyes and understand with your own mind and see it right in front of you what it says so that you have the source. This is what the Talmud is trying to teach us is so important. This is why the Talmud on every every single daf page is going to tell us every single teaching in the name of where it comes from. And nowhere does the redactor of the Talmud stop and say, well, who's that? Who's that guy? I never heard of him. No. We'll only quote famous rabbis. If they're from the period of the Mishnah and earlier, they're called Tanaim. If they're from the period after the Mishnah was written, to the time of the codification of the Talmud, they're called Amoraim. And if one of the Amoras, who is a Gemara teacher, claims to have a tradition, well, where did he get it from? Just because he says so is not good enough. We want to go back to a Tana, a Mishnaic teacher. So therefore, if we're going to ask a question, all right, so everybody says that you can pray until noon and no later. Who says? Well, wait a second. Remember Rab Mari? No, who's Rab Mari? Rab Mari, he's the son of Rabbi Huna, the son of Rabbi Yirmiyah ben Abba. So we got 4 generations there. Well, this guy, all right, he said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, a principle. And now we're ready to discuss that principle. Ta'a v'lo hitpalel aravit mitpalel b'shaharit shtayim. He doesn't directly answer the question of everybody says you can only pray until noon and no later. He's going to say, let me give you an example. Let me give you from another circumstance where I'm going to lay down the foundation, not only of my question, but of my challenge. Again, remember, we're dealing with a redacted, edited text. And the text is not just here to tell us what, it's to tell us how to think. Remember I talked to you about the flow of the knowledge. So you can actually sit back and read this and understand it almost like a meditation. And the meditation is technical and complicated as any of the combinational moves of any of a Shaolin, kata program. You have to get with the flow. So again, our question is, everybody says you can pray until noonday, no later? Really? Didn't this Rab Mari, blah, 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 in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, didn't he teach us something? That if you made a mistake, and you missed your evening prayer, that at the next morning you can recite 2 prayers. Oh, and also, if you missed by accident the morning prayer, then at the afternoon you can pray 2. Do you understand? The original context is if I miss my evening prayer, I can make it up by reciting the morning prayer twice. Recite the regular morning prayer, and then I recite an additional one to make up for the lost one. And similarly, if I miss my morning prayer, then in the afternoon prayer, I say my afternoon prayer, the Amidah, and then afterwards I make up my Amidah from the missed morning. Now, if I make up my missed prayer from the morning in the afternoon, didn't we just say you can pray until noontime and no later? Well, I just prayed in the afternoon and was okay. So this example here appears to contradict the rule of the Mishnah, which states I can only pray until noon and no later. Well, you missed it. Okay, fine, I get it. I missed it. It was an accident. Something happened. Is there any rectification? Yes, there is. Well, how is that possible? You just said I can only pray until noon and no later. So how are you allowing me then to pray afternoon? Seems to be a contradiction, no? Go with the flow. Understand. So now, the Gemara is again going to answer. And it says, Kule yoma matzile va'azil. Actually, one can pray all day long. right? The Aramaic word is matzile, right? Tzale. And then you go and you pray. However, ad chatzot yehave le'sachar tefila bismana. But if you pray the morning prayers prior to noon, not only have you fulfilled your obligation to recite the prayer, you fulfill a secondary obligation and receive a secondary benefit of reciting the prayer in its proper time. So there are actually two benefits, two commandments, two mitzvot. So therefore, when you pray in its proper time, you get both benefits. However, mekan ve'ilach sechar tefila yahavele. If you were to pray after the proper time, well, you did pray, so you get the, if you will, the reward or the benefit from reciting the prayers. However, sechar tefila bizmana, the merit or value of prayers in their proper time, lo yahavele, you will not receive. So therefore, wise words from the book of the Bible, remember Kohelet, there's a time and a place for all things under heaven. Well, if prayer is simply of your heart and it's just of your desires, sure, you could recite like that any time that you want. But ritual has its time. Ritual has its place. So, however much is in your heart, goody goody for you. But when things have to be done, they have their time and they have their place. So the time of shaharit is in the morning. The best time, right with the crack of dawn. But you can pray later. That's true. But if you miss that time, well, you can make up the prayer. And you'll have the benefit of the prayer. But you won't have the benefit of the prayer in its proper time. And you say, well, what difference does it make? Well, I don't know. Consider it in whatever way you would. A prayer, consider it like 50%. In its time, consider 50%. Together you get 100%. So therefore, if you had missed the proper time, you still get 50%, but not the whole 100. Maybe that's an analogy that we could use. Are there really times, special times? Oh, but of course. In moralistic literature, Musar, Kabbalistic literature, especially the meditative literature, where we ascribe all kinds of forces and powers to different times, different hours, and different days. Yes, these influences are cosmic. They are part of nature. And learning the correlations and the rituals associated with the times is vital and essential for walking the natural path. This is part and parcel of Gemara. The Gemara knew and understood this and incorporated it to this very day in Halakha. Now, we're not going to, at this initial point, get into a halachic discussion. When we are concluding a section of the Gemara which deals with the topic, we can jump 1,000 years in the future and discuss how it is found in the Shulchan Aruch and look at the peripherals from the different ideas and beliefs, commentators, etc. And we'll do that. That's our Sephardi derech of understanding the Gemara. But now, in the short time that we have left, to conclude this little section here, we've discussed why names are important. Why it is important to not only know your source, but to check the source, to make sure it's valid. And understand the vitality, the importance of the authority. You want to do things in a certain way? Fine. But don't think that certain things that are not obligatory to be done in one way have to be done that way. And also know that there are other things that are done in a certain way. And when there is a certain way to do it, that's what we do. That's pretty much concluding the section of this Gemara that we've just learned. God be willing, in our next class, we'll pick up the discussion and we'll continue this topic of this mistaken missing of prayer and where we go with it. So I want to again thank you for joining me in this class, our second lesson. Again, I'm your host, Ariel Tzadok. Thank you again so much for your continuing support of our Kosher Torah School. See you in lesson 3. God bless. Good night. Shalom.